To the Southern Pines Town Council work session. Appreciate you all being here, and we're going to go straight into the town manager's comments. So, Reagan?
Thank you, Mayor Haney. I will be very brief with these. Your work session this afternoon, outside of taking action on your written decision for the recent Morganton Park South preliminary development plan, really just consists of a series of presentations from staff on both current activities and also upcoming potential amendments to the code and/or other items. So with that, if I may, I'd like to ask James Mickle, the town engineer, to come forward and talk a little bit about an award that the Southern Pines Water System has recently received.
Welcome, James, and congratulations. Thank you. How many, 64 plants in the state got this?
Yes, ma'am.
How many plants are there in the state?
There's about 148 based on the count I looked at.
Job well done.
Yeah. Well, I can't take hardly any of the credit, if zero at all.
But you would get the blame if it didn't work, so
I'm okay with that. Dave, if you want to stand up for just a second. Some of you may or may not know, this is David McHugh. He is the head operator at the water plant. As many of you know, we contract out operations to a company called Suez. But David's been with us for 29 years. He's been the operator through every previous iteration of contract operator that we've had since then. So he was with Suez right now, United Water before that, and I don't even know who came before them, but others. But if there is anybody who knows the town of Southern Pines water plant, it is Mr. David McHugh right there. And just a little bit of information. I won't take up too much time about this, but the area-wide optimization program was a program started between EPA and various states. North Carolina was one of those participants. They had the goal of basically helping municipalities, utilities, and their water treatment processes to exceed the minimum standards. The EPA says, you shall meet these various minimum standards just to be able to allow to operate. But those are minimum standards, and it's always better to, of course, exceed those where you can. Hence the program that they came up here, to which David has done an excellent job. He goes through various continuing education requirements and training programs to make sure that the plant's always up to snuff. And then he goes above and beyond by meeting, if you've seen these items in your packet, I won't read them out. But he has to continue to meet these standards throughout the year to be able to achieve this award. With the big focus being on turbidity being a prime indicator of overall treatment quality. There's a lot to it more than just there's stuff in the water. The more stuff there is in the water, the more microbiological activity you have, which is not good. So the lower the number, the lower overall indicators that there's something else going wrong with the system. And by exceeding those minimum standards, we're essentially saying there's less activity in the system overall than would otherwise be allowed. So thanks to all of David's efforts, this is the fourth year in a row that we've actually achieved this.
It's going to run out of wall space.
Well, I was just talking
We'll
to
deal with that as it comes along.
Yeah.
How about that?
So this is 4 years in. If we get 10 years in a row, we will get the Gold Star Award. So we have a goal in mind to keep this moving forward.
Excellent. Thank you. And I appreciate the fact that minimum standards is not how we do things. So thank you.
Exactly.
And thank you, David. Appreciate your being here and your hard work and your whole staff, because that takes a lot. And it's nice to know that we have such a great water quality. So we thank you. That adds to the quality of our living here.
And if anybody's interested, I have a few just basic bullet points so people are aware of some of the things going on down at the water plant if we want to hear those.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm sure you guys probably remember from budgeting the last couple of years, we've had a very large project to do a lot of upgrades and upfits at the water plant. It's been quite a path to get to this point. The water plant's no different than any other construction project that we saw some significant budget overruns with the initial bids, but we have worked closely with Suez and the contractors to get things down within to a manageable range. And that project is finally in the short rows of getting started. We expect to have the contractor on site in the next couple of weeks. They've already reached out about getting their job site trailer set up. A lot of materials are already ordered. Of course, we've already got some backlog on some things that normally wouldn't take as long as they do. But thankfully, some of the big items like generators, we actually ordered those last year knowing that it was going to take a while. And it doesn't really matter if we order it, if the contractor orders it, it's still going to be the same generator. Some other items going on at the water plant. Suez is in the process of kind of updating their asset management and work order systems at the water plant, moving them into a newer, more modern system. They're looking to wrap up kind of the first phase of that towards the end of this year. And next year, we'll be moving into the next phase, which will be really more focused on the long-term planning aspects at the water plant. And then just as a general talking point, our flows at the plant have stayed very consistent the last couple of years. We're still seeing kind of an average in the neighborhood of 3 million gallons a day of treated water. But during peak times, that does jump to about 6.5. And that's basically been the trend for the last probably 4 or 5 years. So if there's any other questions?
Anyone have any questions for?
Well done.
Well done.
David, well done.
Yes, appreciate what y'all done. It's comforting kind of to know the challenges we face that we do have our own water. It's challenging to keep it going like y'all have, so good job on that.
And it's never a problem until it is. So we thank you for people not noticing how good our water is, because they sure would notice if it wasn't.
Yeah,
So
I'd
thank
like
you.
to take the opportunity to thank David and congratulate him on the award. I've worked with him for 17 of his 29 years, and we've worked through some droughts and other very challenging times down there at the plant. And he's always just been fantastic to work with. And I know it's always a challenge for this council when we talk about fees and water and sewer rates. But really, those are the dollars that support what's going on down there and being able to maintain this type of quality. So just fantastic job, David, and thank you.
Yeah, job well done. Thank you very much, and we appreciate your being here. So now we move on to the Morgan Park South PDP. The staff has drafted or prepared a draft. So we're looking for, unless anyone has any questions of the draft, we just need a motion to let them move forward.
Okay. Anybody questions? Because I don't have any.
Okay, nobody has questions?
Questions? No.
Okay.
The written decision for PD 0921 is prepared by the town staff.
A second.
Pleasure of the council.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. And now we are going to be updated by Chief Polidori, who's behind me, on the Citizens Connect.
I'm going to swap seats out with Chief just so he can use his computer here.
Okay. Yeah, don't trip. We've got enough cords here, don't we? For those of you who do not know, this is Chief Nick Polidori, who will demonstrate. This is a recently launched portal for submitting non-emergency incident reports and anonymous tips. So thank you very much for keeping us on the cutting edge and for showing us what you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to present. About a year and a half ago, we worked out with our software vendor for records management to have what's called Citizen Connect. And on Citizen Connect, there's a lot of options where you can look at incident reports, accident reports. The public can print their own public copies. You can look at crime data and calls for service. There's all sorts of stuff on there for the public to look at, and we've publicized that pretty well. But here recently, I asked Southern Software to look at a citizen reporting option for non-emergency calls for service. So looking at some examples around the country and around the state, other larger police departments and smaller police departments, the technology's there, so pretty quickly they wrote the code and they pushed that out for us. So last Tuesday, we went live with it after some testing. Working through some kinks, I think we've gotten most of that worked out after we went live, but it's pretty good. So I think what I'll do is The easy way to do it is I'll go into where you as a citizen can report a crime online, show you how to do it, and then I'll explain the back end part for us on how we see it. So if you want to report a crime, there's 6 specific crimes. Larceny, stolen property, identity theft, credit card fraud, lost property, vandalism, and I believe stalking might be one. But once you get into this website, it tells you what the 6 crimes are, gives you an example, and some tells you you can't report it for a certain crime. So the easiest way to do it is you just go to the Town of Southern Pines website, which I'm on right here.
We can't get that any darker, can we?
It is tough to see, isn't it?
It is tough.
But if you scroll down and it's right under the news flash and this blue button, it says report a non-emergency crime. And that's a link. Back to here. And that takes you to Citizen Connect. And this is our page on Citizen Connect. They have other customers that use it as well. And on this page, you see there's Maine on the left. It's really tough to see up there. I'm sorry. I encourage you to look at it on your, you can look at your smartphone or PC, whatever you want. So you can look at daily reports, and this gives just a screenshot of kind of what we've been doing for the past 3 days. If there's a view report, then that report is ready to be looked at. You can look at incident mapping on here, and you can do a date range. I apologize, we really can't see what I'm moving around up here. Last 7 days or 30 days, and you submit, and we'll just do the last 30 days. It takes a couple minutes to load, but that's a 30-day snapshot of what we've been doing for reports filed. And there's a legend on the right-hand side that'll tell you exactly what each crime is. So if I zoom in a little bit, this right here, I don't know if you can see where I'm at. Far left bottom of the screen.
Okay.
Okay, that's an aggravated, or excuse me, a simple assault case, so that it pulls up the legend to it, and you just click the case number, and it generates a public copy of a report. So you can see the reports we're filing, but also an overall view of kind of where crime is at in town and what types of crimes. It's a nice piece of technology for the town and people to visit. It also saves us a lot of time when insurance companies and the like come in and want copies of crash reports. So instead of having a records clerk up front constantly pulling files for them, they can just go online and get their own reports now. So it saves us a lot of time. So anyway, back to the start. If you want to file a report, let me go back. You can submit tips. The public can submit tips to any crimes right here. It's anonymous. You type your name if you want to. Phone number's optional. That's the only thing that's required is the tip. And you can type in, I've seen drug activity at, X location. And then on our end, we get that notification.
How much turnaround time do you have with that?
We get daily notifications. Whenever there's a tip submitted, 4 or 5 of us here at the police department get an email generated right to us, just like what I'm about to show you for the incident reporting.
Okay.
At which point is the report determined legitimate?
That what we're about to do, the citizen reporting, that's this intake process, if you will. So if you want to file a report, if somebody stole your lawnmower from your yard, and we'll just use that as an example. Once you're on the town website and you click that icon to file a report, you come down here to submit a report. Kind of gives you a disclaimer at the top. And here's your offenses to select: damage to property, and a description and example. Same for lost property, credit card fraud, harassing phone calls, identity theft, and stolen property. The good thing about when we were looking at this and I was working with the software vendor is, especially stolen property, we can't do this online for obviously stolen vehicles or stolen firearms. We definitely want to be with the reporting person or the victim at that point to get obviously more information for that. So we'll say stolen property. Someone stole my lawnmower. We'll call it, it happened on the 20th at 3:15 in the afternoon. Excuse me, this is the submitted date. The date of offense, it'll pop up for you right here.
Is there any way to get that darker? I'm sure if we can't see it and we're closer, I'm sure no one else can see
Yeah,
it.
I don't know of any way.
Okay,
Yeah,
because it's really tough to see it.
I know, I apologize for that.
And I
This
can
is-
kind of cheat looking at your, looking at your
Yeah.
computer, but,
I think it's the light, to be honest with you.
well, can't do much about that.
I think I can make it any brighter. Let me see here.
Or darker. Can you get it darker?
I could try. I don't believe so, folks. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, people can go online themselves and it's just difficult to see.
And then you want to put your location in. We'll just. It starts auto-populating. So we'll put 190 Fox Hollow Court. And it populates pretty much the rest of it for you. And this is the interesting part, which we've had a couple of struggles with, where if it's a business that's a victim, that's all they put is the business name, so we have no contact information. So we've worked on that to have it a mandatory field to pop down. So I'm the victim. Just enter your name. Again, it's asked for your birth date and email address because that starts populating into the report we file.
So if anybody, say, live in Pinehurst or Aberdeen or wherever, you see a crime, you can go on this and still fill all this out.
Well, it has to be,
In Southern
that's
Pines.
right, yep. It has to be a crime that occurred in Southern Pines, and to your point, Mr. Murphy, is that's part of the vetting process when we get to these. It might be somebody that, it occurred in Whispering Pines, but they think it happened in Southern Pines. So that's, when we intake these reports, that's what we look for as well, the actual incident location.
Right.
So,
Anyone can submit a tip.
That's what I'm saying.
that's right, yeah, anybody can submit a tip.
What chief is in right now, this is the actual filing of an incident.
Right, right.
Right.
That would need to be in Southern Pines and in their jurisdiction.
Well, people sometimes don't have a clue what town they're in.
Well, that's very common, especially around here. I live in Southern Pines, but I have a Carthage mailing address, so that happens quite a bit.
The tip is somehow retaliatory, or where the person is really not being honest about a particular crime, at which point does that report go and become public?
Well, it's two separate things. So the anonymous tip is not the actual report,
Right.
right? So if we get anonymous tip, obviously we look and see if it's actually valid. Whereas these reports coming in, somebody's actually trying to report that they're a victim of a crime. So it's two different processes.
Gotcha.
So you've got tips and victims, basically.
Correct.
You could not go on as a citizen and just look at all the tips that came.
No, those are
Okay.
specific to us. Everything that we get on the back end is not public.
Great. Okay.
So don't get bored. What's going on? Huh?
We're just going to call it a Craftsman lawnmower because it's already there. And if I have a serial number, that's what we're asking for, model numbers. That's all very helpful to us. So we'll put model 2 5553. We'll make up a serial number. That's the serial number. And you can enter multiple pieces of property. Then when we get down to the end, we want to, just a brief synopsis of where it was at. Mower was last seen in my backyard 3 days ago. And then you can say, I do or do not wish to press charges if somebody's caught. If you saw a person or a vehicle, you can click that box. And if you have suspect information, you can enter it. So we're going to say yes. You can put build in there, medium. There's lots of different fields that are not mandatory but very helpful. If you're the reporting person, it says it right there, only if you're not the victim. If I'm reporting my neighbor's lawnmower stolen because he might be on vacation, that's where my information would go. And once we get to the end of the fields, you have to click yes to the best of your ability and information you provided is true and correct. And then you definitely want to click receive an email copy of this form. And what will happen when they hit submit, you get an email and it has a temporary case number assigned to it. I left one out.
So you said this is already activated. Has
Yes.
anyone used it yet?
Yes, we've had 4 or 5 come in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's been nice.
Not that crime is a good thing. That's not what I meant. The fact that it takes some of the pressure off of the staffing too.
That's right. So I don't know if you can read it at the bottom. It tells you what your temporary ID number is. And you also get an email. So on the back end, that email pretty much says everything that you typed in, your temporary ID, and that you'll get a call back within 72 hours. That gives us time to look at it, process it, account for holidays and weekends, but our internal policy is 48 hours, so we know we're getting back pretty quick. On the backside, in a program called Data Analytics, which is not public facing, we go down to submitted reports. Once we get the email, myself, the deputy chief, both captains, and the investigations division sergeant will get the notification. So there's a lot of redundancy built in, so nothing gets left behind. We look at submitted reports, and of course I have to log back in. And here's my report I just submitted right here. Click view submission. And this is what it looks like on our end. So once it's approved, whoever's looking at it will make sure the address is in town and it's the correct crime that can be reported online. And the feedback to the victim or reporting person is we call down to dispatch, we get an OCA number and CAD to call, it's a call for service. Click enter in RMS, we give them their case number. And then we send a follow-up email to the victim with the incident number. And then we could type something in there, Officer Smith is assigned your case. And submit. And internally on our side, we either forward that email or we print it and give it to a detective or a line officer working the road to follow up, depending on what the crime is. Some of it, the benefit is some of our larger retail stores, based off of their internal policy, they might have to wait 3 or 4 or 5 days a week to report larcenies because their loss prevention wants to see everything first. So what will happen is they'll call and want to report 5 or 6 larcenies at one time, which It's quite a bit of time for a patrol officer to be out at one location. So this is ideal for that scenario right there. It's working well so far. Like I said, there was a couple of hiccups on the first couple, and that was easy for the software writer to adjust to make certain things more mandatory. So Southern Software did a real good job for us here.
Are we the only ones in this area that has this, or are we just
I think Pinehurst Police was looking at it, but yes, we're the only ones live with
the
it
only
right
ones
now.
live?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Nick, just to be clear, and I think I know the answer to this. This is just for a non-emergency
Correct.
event to report. An officer still responds and investigates, but it's not stop everything and go to this. So it maximizes manpower.
That's right. So that's the point behind this is waste of time is not the right phrase.
Well, maximize manpower.
Maximize manpower.
When
right?
there's
So-
time to go out
So if
within
you
24
if you
hours.
lost your cell phone at the downtown park, that's 30 minutes. By the time the officer gets the call, gets dispatched, arrives, talks to the victim, takes the information, and then leaves. So instead of that 30 minutes being used for that, the citizen can merely just report this online, and then we follow up with it the next day. And it might be somebody working a light duty assignment, or a supervisor working out of his office can make that call and follow up with this case right here. Because there's a lot of these where people just need a report for insurance purposes. There'll be no follow-up, there'll be no prosecution for a lost phone, right? So they just need a report to turn into their insurance company so they can get a new phone. So that's really a big benefit for us.
Chief, the lost phone is an excellent example. I mean, how many of those do you probably get in a week or a month?
A lot. It's, it varies, but yeah, we get a lot of those calls. Vandalisms where somebody went, baseball bats going down the road hitting mailboxes. They can take up a lot of time as well. And again, a lot of people just call and say, hey, just so you know this happened, I just need to file with my homeowners. I don't need really anybody to come out. So that's a good opportunity there.
Yeah, so I think the real message to folks is, in addition, is it's easier for you to report a non-emergency crime,
right.
but you're still going to get the same response.
You're always going to get the same service from us. That's correct.
Great.
Yes.
Perfect.
And this is an option. It's nothing mandatory. We just offer it as an option online. When people call into the dispatchers, they offer it. But let's face it, a lot of people don't have an internet connection still. So we're always coming.
Chief, would this include retail shoplifting, or are they still calling you guys?
If it's not in progress, yeah, we would encourage them to just report it online. Again, same scenario. Somebody steals a pair of jeans from Belk, and the suspect's already gone, has been gone for 30 minutes. So all we're doing is the same exact thing that they're going to do online. So,
That's a great initiative.
here, Mr. Murphy, here's the anonymous tips. This is our end. So if you file an anonymous tip, then this is what we'll see on our end. It's the same exact thing. So I'll be careful what pops up here. So that really wasn't even an anonymous tip. That was somebody telling us they need a report for a child custody case. That should have been a phone call. But overall, I think it's going to work out great. It's going to really give us a lot of flexibility and more time for the patrol staff on the road to be working a lot of traffic complaint areas. We get a lot of that. So I think we can maximize our resources with this initiative.
Are your police officers excited about this?
Yeah, they were very pleased to see it.
Good,
So,
good.
again, you never want to use the term waste of time because it's never a waste of time, but you really want to be able to maximize what you have, and this is a good way to do it.
It's a good use of time. Yeah, and your manpower.
Correct.
Yes.
And was this built in, I guess, to assume budgets so that this is funded moving forward?
It's built into our software that we pay annually, our maintenance fees.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate your being on the cutting edge here.
Well, we try.
Again, no minimum standards here.
Any other questions?
Anybody have questions for Chief? Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
All right, moving right along. The next thing on the updates is the code amendment for skateboards. This one is kind of interesting.
You might want to hang around for this one.
Welcome back.
I'm just going to hand the mic over to Jessica on this one. As council will recall, at last month's meeting, you had an individual on the agenda, Mr. Gano, who had wished to address council about loosening up some of the town codes relative to the use of skateboards, and talked a little bit about skateboards as transportation and also just the downtown area in general. Also, Ms. Coleman, who I believe is with us this afternoon, was present and had a letter in reaction to that request, just specifically looking for some greater protection for the train station welcome center area due to a number of issues that we've experienced there. Unfortunately, many of them tied directly back to some of the regular skateboarders in the downtown. So Assistant Manager Roth kind of ran with that, spent some time speaking with Nick and others internally, and has come up with maybe a code suggestion to address both skateboards as transportation, but also the interest and concerns of Ms. Coleman. And we're using skateboards in a very generic term, so this also includes a lot of other wheeled objects that would be affected by the code, but everybody recognizes the skateboard, and that's what sort of generated it to start with. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jessica.
Thank you. So there is a memo in your packet, which is also online. It starts on page 11 of the packet. And BJ has put a map up here on the screen that I'm going to refer to a lot, and that's on page 14 of the packet. As Reagan mentioned, our staff got together and had some pretty interesting and in-depth conversations about these two requests, which were really kind of competing, and also just what are the facts surrounding skateboards in the downtown district. And this included Reagan, myself, Chief Polidori, several other officers from his team. We also got input from BJ from a planning perspective, and then we also spoke with Cindy King, our Recreation and Parks Department, because you'll see that this does include our parks. So what we found, the police ran some reports to document both calls for service as well as incident reports related to skateboarding activity from January 1st of 2020 up to the present. And what we found in that was that there were a total of 20 different calls for police services. These included 14, which were just kind of what we considered general skateboarding activity. This was, where maybe the skateboarders were kind of aggressive with some pedestrians, or, private businesses were not wanting them to skate on their private property. And then the other 6 calls for service were related to graffiti, some fights. There was a accident that involved one of the skateboarders that had EMS report. Of these 20 calls, almost all of them were at public facilities. There were 4 at the train station, which is consistent with which Ms. Coleman reported to us. We also had 4 at Downtown Park. We had 2 at the post office, 1 at the Sunrise stage, and then there were 9 other calls that were at different areas around town, and even 1 at McDeeds Creek Elementary School. In addition to those 20 calls for service, there were also 10 incident reports that were related to vandalism. And as Chief Polidori just referenced, a lot of times they get these after the fact, after they've already happened. And so we do know that these 10 were related to people who have been confirmed as skateboarders downtown. Some of the graffiti that they reported had been tagged actually by some of these skateboard groups. So we do know that those were associated with skateboarders as well. So there were some other incidents as well that included throwing rocks through windows, breaking and entering, riding skateboards inside buildings. And again, these were almost all downtown as well. There were several at the train station. There were some at the Montessori School on May Street, the Sunrise Stage, the Pilot, and some of our other commercial businesses. So based on these police reports and incidents and just some of our own information that we're aware of, we reviewed all of this data. We reviewed the current code, which does prohibit skateboarding downtown, and we came up with a recommendation to try to address all of these concerns. As Reagan mentioned, the recommendations that we're talking about, they do collectively apply to skateboards, scooters, roller skates, inline skates, really anything that you can use the foot to propel. But for simplifying, we're just referring to them as skateboards or skateboarders. So what staff found, we feel that the current approach, which bans skateboards and similar in the downtown district, is reasonable. We have a very, very active downtown, which everyone knows. And there's so many people that access this by walking. And this is people who need to get to our retail, our dining. We have professional services, including town buildings. We have a lot of public facilities downtown. And public sidewalks are the primary means of accessing these, since they don't all have private parking lots. And so what this means is that people who are downtown, they have to navigate street furniture, trees, signs. They see other pedestrians. They see people with strollers, wheelchairs, dogs. There's crosswalks that they have to navigate. We have delivery trucks downtown. We have delivery drivers crossing the sidewalks. Then you have vehicle doors. You have construction. So there is a lot that's happening in our very busy area downtown. And so when you add in skateboards or scooters or things like that, that makes it even more dangerous. And it's particularly challenging for people with disabilities, which we're sensitive to. And so while some might suggest, well, just keep the skateboarders off the sidewalks and let them ride downtown on the downtown streets. Yes, you could say that, but we also ran some other data, and we just don't feel like it's safe to force the skateboarders on the downtown streets. Those streets are busy. And Chief Polidori, his team actually put up some of the traffic, what do you call those? The speed signs, thank you. They put those up just last weekend to get some current data. And on the weekend days, we have anywhere from 2,300 to 3,100 vehicles that are traveling along Broad Street. So that's busy. And so to force those skateboarders onto those streets, we don't feel that that's safe or reasonable either. We do think that the current code should be modified to better curtail the documented incidents by the skateboarders who are damaging property, who are putting graffiti on the buildings, or who are just creating general danger downtown. We know that because the current code specifically prohibits skateboarding on the sidewalks, what they tend to do, as Ms. Coleman has confirmed, is they seek out other downtown locations that aren't technically maybe sidewalks. And this includes the platform at the train station, the stage at the Sunrise Theater. And what happens there is, they may do vandalism, or, just the act of riding their skateboards causes harm to our buildings. And even we have a lot of historic buildings downtown. We have the nice brick sidewalks and things like that, and we need to protect those. So with all of this in mind, what our recommendation is that we create a new pedestrian district. And this is the map that we have highlighted on the screen. And the reason we're calling it a pedestrian district is because we want to prioritize pedestrians in our downtown district. We want to make sure that they have safe, walkable sidewalks and streets that are easily accessible by all, including people who have disabilities. This boundary here, it roughly runs from Vermont Street all the way down to West Morganton. And then it runs from Ash down to, let's see, where did we end up sending that? Bennett Street, yeah. Sorry, thank you for helping me out there. So it's larger than what's considered our historic district, but it's smaller than a downtown overlay district that we have. And our thought process behind this pedestrian district is that all of the businesses within this area, either currently or at some point in the future, would have sidewalks that people would access these buildings with these sidewalks, or there's other public facilities like town buildings, churches, things like that. And so by calling this the pedestrian district, we are prioritizing pedestrian safety in this district. And so with that in mind, this is not intended to be an anti-skateboard district, it's a pedestrian safety district. And so we recommend prohibiting all of the skateboards, the scooters, those different devices that I mentioned earlier. We would still allow bicycles and cars, obviously. We would also allow children who are 10 or younger to ride their bicycles, scooters, skateboards on the sidewalks as long as they have a parent or an adult who is physically with them. We already have that allowance in our code today for bicycles, and so we thought that that could be expanded to allow for skateboarders, scooters, things like that, because those are the young kids who are with their parents. One exception that we did want to recommend in this pedestrian district is to allow the skateboards and the scooters on the basketball courts in downtown park. This wouldn't include the full downtown park because there is other infrastructure like the tennis courts, or there are competing, you've got the young kids at the playground, but we do see that skateboarders do like to come to the basketball courts, and we would like to keep some area in downtown where they can enjoy the district. We know they like to come downtown as much as everybody else does. So essentially what this would mean is that once the skateboarders, the scooter riders hit this red line that surrounds this pedestrian district, they would at that point have to get off of their skateboards, and then they would walk through downtown. And so they wouldn't be able to ride anywhere downtown except on those basketball courts at downtown park. We would further recommend that we install some new skateboard racks, and I did put a picture of them in your memo. They're very similar to bicycle racks. They can be installed in a variety of different ways, but it allows people who are on skateboards or scooters to lock up their devices. And so that way they can, go to the ice cream parlor, go to the library, go to the other things that they are coming downtown to do, and not have to worry about the safety or the security of their skateboards or feel enticed to maybe ride those. So we've thought that that would help to emphasize this. And then really the last recommendation that we have, which goes in line with Mr. Gano's request, is that we do consider modifying our code to be more flexible to skateboarders in other areas of downtown or of Southern Pines. He is correct that the current code really only allows for you to ride in residential neighborhoods, and that it essentially says once you leave our residential areas, unless you're at a defined crosswalk, then you cannot ride anywhere. We do recognize that there are young members of our community who can't drive, and they do like to ride their skateboards, and they like to come downtown. And so we feel it's reasonable to allow them to ride in other areas than neighborhoods. And what we specifically recommended is that they be allowed to ride on sidewalks, such as the sidewalk on May Street, on Pennsylvania Avenue, any of these other sidewalks that are allowed on collector or arterial streets that would allow them to get places around Southern Pines. That would allow them to get to school if they'd like. But then again, once they're heading to downtown, once they reach this district, they would have to get off their skateboards and either walk through the district until they were on the other side, and then they could get back on their skateboard. Or if they were just staying in the district, then they'd just walk and carry or lock up their skateboard if we installed those racks. So that is the end of our recommendations and the review that we did. Do you have any?
How would this be marked? I mean, how would they know where they're supposed to go? And it never fails you tell a kid,
Oh, sure.
don't cross this. They look at you, go, uh-huh. And guess
Yep.
what? They're going to be all over that.
Oh, yeah. No, and you're right. And we did talk about that a lot. And obviously signage would be one thing that we would do, and especially at areas.
And how would you enforce this too? That's the other cute part. We don't want to be that town either.
Sure. I'm going to ask Chief Polidori to talk about that in just a second. But to get to your first question, we would install some new signage within the pedestrian district where it would be prohibited. But we also discussed that a good social media campaign could really help. Obviously we want to reach parents, and we even talked about it's important to reach the kids, and understanding what social media platforms they're on. Maybe a video might be an appropriate tool to use. We'd also like to, if this were approved, reach out to the schools and ask them to help, because we do feel like we need to get directly to them and send that message to them. But in terms of enforcement, if you could add on to that.
Enforcement would be basically like it is now. We do a lot of warnings. We rarely write a parent or somebody who's over the age of 18 a citation, or even do juvenile petitions for a juvenile skateboarding when they're not supposed to be. The better approach is again, calling a parent and diversion instead of charging somebody for riding a skateboard. Now, if they continue to come down and break the ordinance or cause damage or trespass, then, then sometimes you have to elevate beyond diversion. But this is actually an easier approach for us. The current ordinance, it's much more harder to enforce.
Very restrictive
Well,
currently.
it is, and then we get a lot of calls about the skateboards, as you've seen, and we're not anti-skateboard, but what we have now is hard. It's just hard. When they're on the train platform or they're on a trackside or some other private property, it's really hard for us to enforce it. So if you have this envelope here with the basketball court open for skateboard use,
I think that's a nice addition.
yeah, I do as well. It gives people who like to skateboard a place to go. This outline of a pedestrian district here really gives us, the police department, a better chance to take enforcement action or warnings and actually tell somebody, hey, if you're between these roads in this boundary, you're in the pedestrian district and you can't ride a skateboard on the sidewalks or streets. Whereas now you have to think in your head and go, okay, well, you can't do it on the sidewalks here. That's a feeder street. Maybe you can or cannot ride it there. So this cleans it up for us. And again, enforcement's not the goal for us for kids riding skateboards or
Right.
bikes downtown.
Yeah, I don't want us to be a bunch of fuddy-duddies and not allow any of that to happen, because you're right, before they can drive, this is their means of transportation. And roller skates, I realize, I know I have a roller skater over here.
But one thing I did fail to mention is that skateboarding would be permitted on private properties within this district. So it's assuming that they have the permission of the property owner.
Right.
I was just curious. What was the rationale including ash in that zone?
We were trying to make it, recognizing that as you're coming down Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, and some of those streets from the east side, there are commercial businesses there that we wouldn't necessarily want the skateboarders on those streets. So by extending it to ash, that makes it easier for them to enforce on those side streets. But it also allows them, as I mentioned, to ride on the sidewalks on May Street and kind of start to enter into the district. And once they hit ash, then they would get off their skateboards and walk the rest of the way.
Yeah, I think if you think of the businesses along Pennsylvania or New Hampshire, it's not so much about being on Ash Street.
Correct.
It's encompassing those sections of a Pennsylvania or New Hampshire that go up to Ash Street.
I see that. There's a lot more blocks of residential in that ash part than the rest, but if it's sort of needed for the cross streets, I see the rationale.
I appreciate the hard work that you all put into this, because we had a citizen who had a concern, and, oh, I see somebody's hands up who wrote a letter to us. Did you want to say something? I know this is not typically, you're not supposed to talk, but you did forward a letter, so come forward if you don't mind.
And I will offer along those lines, I believe Jessica sent both Mr. Gano and Ms. Coleman this specifically in advance, since they were the two individuals that kind of initiated the conversation.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you. I had to lock the passenger waiting room Friday night to keep skateboarders out while we were doing the Halloween hunt. We served over 500 children, and there were a lot of parents and kids in strollers, and a lot of them were hesitant to use the restrooms in the passenger waiting room because the skateboarders were using the platform and then congregating there, so I ended up locking it. But the Chapter 99 in the statutes defines skateboarding as a hazardous recreational activity. Bicycles or roller skates are not defined that way. Ironically, the statute does not define pedestrian, and neither does our UDO. But because case law defines pedestrian as a person on foot or who uses a conveyance such as roller skate, skateboard, other than a bicycle, a pedestrian can also be a person with a disability using a tricycle, quadricycle, or wheelchair. We ask, again, that any modification of the code includes specific language prohibiting skateboarding on the train platform and in the train station. Just because, as the chief said, there's a lack of clarity, and we want to be very, very specific And there's no law out there that's very specific in terms of defining pedestrians. And we're creating a pedestrian district, and I suppose somebody could argue skateboarders are included in pedestrians. So we don't want the police to be put in that position. We've often called them, and often we don't call them, and we just shoo them away. But it's been problematic. And we're very much supportive of a skateboard park being created. So we don't want to be, like you said, anti-skateboarding, but we do have problems with people using the train platform. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions for either Suzanne or Jessica or Nick?
I would simply ask that if Suzanne could shoot that code section to us so we can contemplate it and how to integrate that and deal with the definitions. We did have some internal conversation about singling out the train station, the train platform. To date, we have erred on the side of not doing that, and the reason for that is by defining the district, it's essentially saying nowhere within this district. Again, unless you happen to own private property, you want to give somebody permission, that's entirely your business. But what we didn't want to do was create a scenario where we singled out a single location, the train station in this instance, and by doing so, someone then suggesting that what we didn't single out was suddenly okay. And I'll use the parking lots behind the Sunrise or the library as an example. To try to go through and single out each and every public space, because the private space kind of defines itself. I suppose we could do it within that district, but it seemed much cleaner just to say nowhere within the district rather than getting into the business of having to single out one, which would mean, I believe, we probably need to single out all of them. So that was sort of we did have some internal conversation about it in light of the definitions that Ms. Coleman just brought forward, though I would like that we take a look at that and make sure we're not getting an unintended consequence here.
Yeah. And when you said 3,100, the traffic, that's incredible. It is a lot. I think all of our jaws dropped on that one. Anyone have any questions for these three while they're here?
Yeah, I have a couple, kind of two-sided. One, let's see, is this a 24-hour ordinance? So no skating at any time?
Correct.
Okay. Even when the businesses are closed?
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
The other would have to do with, I guess, the possible competition of space on the basketball courts. If, guys are there to play ball and others want to ride skateboards, how would you navigate? I remember back in the day, in the 70s, they had the tennis courts where you'd actually sign up for a certain length of time and then turn it over for others to play. But as far as the possible, hopefully not confrontations that could occur as a result of designated space.
A couple of thoughts along those lines, Councilman Murphy. So far, and it has been getting used by the skateboarders, the basketball courts have, we haven't seen a conflict play out. I'm not aware of any calls or issues relative to that, Nick, and please correct me.
No,
So that,
competing interest on the court now.
yeah, it hasn't played out, but it may be because as they have always been, they're kind of a first come, first serve type of basis. Interestingly enough, along those lines, Mr. Grieve over my shoulder here, who's done quite a bit of research on skateboarding and has some interest there, has some knowledge of one or two communities that have in fact set aside maybe some skateboard specific time. Even I think he said he has seen what I'll call temporary rails or other things that skateboarders will use that can very easily be used. So I think those are all types of things that we could look at should this move forward. But I'm not familiar with a conflict that has existed to date. That's not to say that it won't ultimately occur at some point.
That's true,
Yeah.
I'm not aware of one either, but
Our
it would also be hard to to say, skateboarders are from 3 to 5 and basketball's 5 to 8, so.
Because then again, then we get into an enforcement issue again, whether that's through the recreation department or the police department, yeah.
That's what we're trying to avoid, I think. Y'all have any?
I agree with Paul on that. It's how do you deconflict the use? It's going to happen. It just is. So we ought to think through it before we set the condition.
It's now at the basketball courts
Yeah.
between different age groups.
Yeah.
A parent and a child that wants to shoot some hoops, but you've got a big group there. I mean, we see that kind of thing go on all day long during the summer.
And with the skateboarders now too, they do currently use the basketball courts, along with the basketball players, so.
In the request, and the last time we spoke, we had two competing requests, if you will. One is, hey, let skateboarders basically go anywhere they want, and the other one is, hey, we need to be a little bit more restrictive. I think we need to do this in a public hearing in the future too, if we look at changing the ordinance and going this restrictive, because I had the same question as Bill did on Ash. It seemed like, I understand there's a couple things, a couple of roads that matter, but then you have a bunch of neighborhoods where there's no businesses. So are we being, and with along the lines of what Carol said, is we don't want to be that town. So somewhere in here is a balance. I do support the idea that skateboarders in downtown, especially on Broad Street, it's not an appropriate use
Yeah.
based on our demographics and the use of the land in there. And the damage that you articulate very well, Jessica, you're damaging real property when you're riding, putting the chucks on the bricks and sliding. You
It's
are.
crowded, and we love our crowded downtown with kids and strollers and dogs and old people and young people and all that stuff. And you don't want some kid zooming through to prove to his friend how fast he can go through downtowns.
And Jessica, your point's really taken. We don't need them on the streets with 2,000 or 3,100 drivers
No.
that are just, in some cases, distracted with all these great tools we have now. They're not necessarily, well, it's factual. We all know this. There's a lot of distracted driving going on. And to put more people on that pavement, put the bicycles, pedestrians crossing,
Parked on either side,
everything, it's,
UPS trucks.
that's a recipe for
FedEx
disaster as well.
trucks, Postal trucks.
And again, this was a first crack at the district, and we can certainly go back and take a look at what moving that line down to Ash, i.e. the backside of the park essentially, would do.
I think it's
Anything about the other three directions of the district that, at least at first sight,
it's a good
and you'll
first,
probably want to leave
good
here and
first
drive
crack.
it and see what
Yes.
that involves. But
I mean, it's a really
Great first
thorough
crack.
first cut. A lot of hard work I can tell a lot of hard work went
Yeah.
into this and a lot of thought.
and we thank you for what you've done. And it's nice to have the fact that you've got Parks and Rec in the two of you, because it's a collaborative thing, and that's how we do stuff. So I thank you very much for the hard work you've done, and it's good to ponder this. But I do think, well, I'm gonna go drive. I won't be driving in my little rented tin can car, but when I get my car back, I'll drive this. Yeah, that's a good first hit. Thank you. We appreciate it. Nice job, Jessica.
for clarification, moving forward, you do not wish to see this on the November agenda, maybe come back with something and plans for even a public input session in December or something?
I think so. I think that'd be
Better,
most
yeah.
appropriate.
I wouldn't be ready yet to yes, no, vote
Okay.
anything.
Are y'all good with December? Okay.
And just a couple of other questions.
It's fine.
Okay.
Time to get here.
The designated area that would make it, okay, off limits to skateboard, in this, does this suggest then that everywhere else in other neighborhoods, West Southern Pines, it's okay to skateboard?
Yes, that was what we were wanting to clarify, because right now it's so restrictive. You can really only ride in residential areas, which that's even pretty vague. I mean, what does that even mean? Because we have residences along some very busy streets. So by specifically spelling out this pedestrian district, and then we also recommend that we, modify the code and say, yes, you can ride in residential areas, but you can also ride on sidewalks, on the collector streets and the arterial streets. Because we talked about this, we said, okay, police, it's currently prohibited to ride on those sidewalks. What happens today if you drive by a skateboarder who's just very peacefully riding down, trying to go somewhere? They said we wouldn't say anything. And so, I mean, if we're not enforcing that now, let's make that permitted so that they can travel around. And then, really the idea is once you got inside this red district, then you get off and walk, but everywhere else is okay.
And it's great that you have the little, the racks, I guess.
What I would say to even kind of double down on that, and it goes back to your question about how would somebody know? I mean, the way the code is currently written, and you heard the chief say, well, it might be a side street, so
Right.
maybe it's okay
don't
and maybe
know
it's
now.
not. Right now, the code refers to thoroughfare and collector streets. And there aren't a lot of people that walk around, drive around knowing exactly what type of street they're on. So this is really an effort to, whether it's this boundary or another boundary, just a way to try to clean it up for everybody that's
But it does
involved.
sound like you have a great method of getting the information out. So
Yeah, we did talk about that. We did.
with 3 boys, I bet you know all the,
I do.
You know where they get their
My
information.
youngest one is one of the skateboarders, so I have some inside information. He's not one of the ones that causes problems, but he does ride down
Talk
there.
later, I think, about this
You
one.
better not be.
Anybody Roth on your,
Clarification. I think it got mentioned before, but the not leg propelled, but scooterish looking things. I think I've even seen skateboards that sort of self-propel. Would that would be just like a bike? You use the street, not sidewalk?
Yeah, we didn't want to prohibit bikes from being downtown because we recognize that we're a very bike-friendly, very bike-active community. So, at this point, we really just wanted to present our recommendations to you and hear if you were interested in moving forward, hearing more. We recognize that there's more work that we need to do on actually defining these definitions so that they're easily enforceable for the police. So, yeah, we would certainly take a look at writing that.
Well, and easily understandable for the community as
Sure.
well. I think more importantly, because I know Nick's policing style and the style of the police department is not to write a citation, it's to
yeah, we don't
get
want
people to do
that.
the right thing.
Right.
And
And that's one reason we like the idea of a video, because you can show some people riding these different devices so they understand what's allowed, what's not.
Get their information.
They like videos.
You like videos?
I hate to do this to you, but I do have a follow-on question.
Of
All right,
course
this
you
is
do.
downtown. What about the other business districts? Do we rely on the shopping center or the shopping area to put their own signs up and determine what they want to do? Or, some have no skateboarding and some have no signs?
Yeah, well, the downtown district is different from our other districts in that it is public property downtown with our sidewalks and things like that. Most of our other kind of shopping districts are private property where, like, let's say the Kohl's Shopping Center, if they wanted to prohibit it, they can, and they can just put signs up. And so that was why we took this approach. Also, we did look at all the incident reports and the calls for service related to skateboarding, and other than the one call at McDeeds Creek, none of them were in the other areas of town. So that suggested to us that it's either not a problem as much as it is down here, or we're not hearing about it, so kind of let those areas self-enforce themselves for now.
Okay, so they would just do the Community Connect and do a report,
They could.
or as they would if they decided to enforce that as a private property.
Yeah, and we also did, evaluate how many calls were initiated by citizens versus how many were initiated by police, and it was kind of split 50-50. So we are getting calls from people, but we're also noticing that our police are addressing it when they see, concerns downtown.
Anybody else? All right.
The areas where we do permit skateboarding, would that put the town in a place of liability if an accident were to occur, based upon the fact that we have written in ordinance that it's okay for
Right.
this activity?
I don't feel that it increases our liability any more than it is today. We allow it in residential areas, and we actually talked about that. And it really goes to, if we become aware of something, a dangerous sidewalk, and somebody, reports that to us, then we do need to respond to that and fix it, or else we could have liability. But, we have people who are walking, who are biking, riding sidewalks, all of those things all over every street, every sidewalk all over the town, and we don't have liability for those activities, 24/7. So we would respond the same way we would in any other incident. I don't know if you want to add on to that.
I think the
Megan?
simplest way to delineate that, Councilman Murphy, would be if we've created the destination, and quite honestly, the scenario that I described that Mr. Grieve was talking about, if we put some rails, temporary rails out, and we set aside a time on the basketball courts and said, this is now your makeshift skate park, we've got to talk to our risk manager about that and make sure that we're insured, et cetera. But as far as just somebody skateboarding on a public sidewalk or a local residential street, it's no different than, as Jessica explained, with the sidewalks and things. If somebody has reported to us a dangerous scenario, a sidewalk that has come up and is a trip hazard, and we haven't dealt with that, we have now assumed some liability. But unless that is the case, we do still maintain some municipal immunity on those types of things.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. The next on our update discussion is this is going to be fun, the water main relocation.
It's
on
not a
US
long one.
1.
I'll ask Mr. Mickle to come forward again to provide that update. But council will recall that we've talked previously about the need to relocate the main water transmission line that runs from our plant down in Pine Bluff up here to the booster station at Biscuitville as part of the synchronized street project that DOT will undertake following the U.S. Open in 2024. And again, the town is responsible because of the size of our system for a percentage of that project. And we also spoke to you about the idea or possibility of oversizing that line toward the future work that needs to be done to wheel more than that 6.5 million gallons a day that James spoke about before. So hopefully I've teed you up a little bit and you can talk about some of the numbers you've received from DOT.
Yeah, well, I think you've got them directly in front of you. The project that's going on with DOT, we're required to relocate the water lines that fall within the areas that DOT's identified. That's not really a decision we get to make. We installed that line years ago by encroachment. Part of that encroachment agreement with DOT basically says if DOT ever so chooses to move the line, then it has to be moved. The real question that we're faced with is an attempt to plan for the future, knowing that, one day eventually that 18-inch line will run out of capacity. It can only move with so much water. Do we want to incur the expense to upsize the line from an 18 to a 24 for the areas that we are going to relocate anyway? Right now, Kinley Horns, the engineer, they're working for DOT directly, but of course coordinating very closely with us. They've come up with the estimate, and they show that the betterment portion of that, because as part of general statute, we are required to participate 25% of the cost of the relocation. But anything that's above and beyond that, i.e. upsizing the line, we have to pay 100% of that additional cost. And that's, a little over $900,000 based on what you see with the estimates there, which is, not an insignificant
Do it
amount.
now or do it later, and then you got to tear up all that all over again, right?
So we either do it for 900,000 for the
Now.
future, or we do it for 4 million later for the future.
Stole my thunder. I was going to bring that point up.
Okay, easy day.
Do you want to address the estimate a little bit? Obviously, they're making estimates in an atmosphere where construction
Who knows?
all over the place.
Yeah, so the estimate is an estimate. Ideally, they'll be bidding the project out sometime early 2022. maybe February, March. Can't get a hard answer out of them right now. They're still trying to work the fine print on the actual agreement that hopefully we'll get this week or next week, and we can have at the first meeting in November, so we can keep them moving forward. But it's a tough bid market out there right now. Thankfully, we are looking at doing this line in all ductile iron, which is not a cheap pipe by any means, but it is not quite as vulnerable to price fluctuations that PVC is, because it's not so much of an oil-dependent type material, and seen the issues with refineries and just, basically anything that's plastic right now can be hard to get a hold of.
Right.
So-
But I do think we're pretty much in agreement that 18 is not it, that we need to go to 24.
Here's the only question I have is, doesn't look like they move it often. So if we pay the extra for the 24 and then they're like, oh, move it again. Is that doesn't happen too often, it appears.
Well, I think part of first of all, moving it off of US 1 is because they're just flat out of right-of-way down there. There is nowhere to move that line without getting it underneath buildings, which is how it ended up over on the parallel street. There aren't plans to do much with that parallel street or any reason to believe anything would happen there because, again, the right-of-way through there is only so large. So it's not to say that something might not need to get moved in the future. It's unlikely to be the entire transmission line,
That's
though.
on Poplar Street, isn't that correct?
Correct, yeah. And most of the time when you're relocating lines, it's generally a function of stormwater design on streets. We are essentially running this line down the middle of the road. Storm usually follows the sides of the road, so if something does get done in the future, usually all you're dealing with are cross lines, which, can be spaced out every couple hundred feet or a couple thousand feet, just depends on the design at the time. But then you're relocating a 20-foot section versus 8,000 feet of line.
It's nice to have a good relationship with Aberdeen, too.
Yeah.
It certainly does help.
So moving forward, what you will see on this, and I know you had just said, Mayor, at 24 makes a lot of sense, and it does, assuming the numbers come in at or near estimate.
Right.
What you will see is an agreement that actually contains both of these numbers.
Okay, so we can compare.
But then when it goes to bid, well, in the agreement, you'll essentially just agree that that's kind of the estimate, because ultimately DOT doesn't hold you to the estimate, whether it's high or low. You're going to pay your 25%, or in the case of a betterment, 100% for whatever the contract ends up being. So you'll see an agreement potentially as early as November, if they get it back to us, that contains both of those numbers. And then, as Mr. Mickle stated, when they go to bid, they'll bid it and we'll actually have the bid numbers, which again won't be the final cost because change orders happen in the field, et cetera, but you'll be able to see at least how close that estimate is to the betterment portion or the differential on the contract.
Any of our federal money that's coming in, can we use that for this, or do we know yet?
That may very well be one of the options, yes.
It's potentially an option. The only thing that gives me pause is there's some language in the interim final rules for the ARPA money that talks about it can't be used for matching federal projects.
Exactly.
And a lot of DOT projects have federal funds with them. So I definitely can't say absolutely yes, but we are definitely looking at that
Okay.
because
If we can't
Or
get
at bare minimum, if it can't be used on this project because of that matching language, it may be able to be used on another
Something
project
else.
that's already planned and funded and would
Okay.
free up the funds to be able to do this.
If we can't get those funds, is this something that we'd have to do a loan or build into enterprise rates? Where does this $1 million come from if we do it?
You,
right now, we have a project, I forget the exact year off the top of my head, but it was several further years out, because we've known this project's coming. And we had a little over $1 million already built into the rate projections. The issue we have now is it's being moved back forward. But, there's several ways to fund it. I don't believe it would absolutely have to be a loan. Now, granted, if we were to go after a loan, I'm sure there's options out there, and it would have a less of a rate impact. But I don't know that moving it up has a huge impact. I think it had about a 2% increase in what's currently projected in, I think it was either 24 or maybe 25 fiscal year, whereas it was a 4%, and now it'd be a 6% rate increase. but also understanding that those are future projections and a lot of things can change between now and then also.
I mean, like we looked before, kicking the can gets really expensive.
Yes.
We're looking at enterprise rates, so definitely I think it's good to do it. Just figuring out how we're going to pay for it now.
If I can confirm the timing, they're going to look to bid this in '22 for execution after '24?
No.
Or is this one starting
They
before
want to
the
get the
open?
utilities moved out of the way prior to the
Prior
open
to the
coming
open.
around.
Okay.
So that once the open occurs, they can go straight to bid on the roadway.
Okay.
Because otherwise, this would represent a year to 18-month delay before they actually dealt with the road surface itself. So they're trying to get this fit in and completed in advance, and then it'll just be the roadway storm, et cetera, come 2024.
Yeah, because the roadway project itself is a large project. It's not just this piece of
Right.
US 1, it's also 15501, and trying to get all of that done in the, 4.5 years between US opens is going to be tough for them as it is. So they're trying to get done what they can ahead of time.
I think as we look at the ARPA rules, though, I think, yeah, the matching funds, but this one splits, so there may be something in there with the upsize that we may be able to apply it to the upsize as well.
True.
That's separate. And, we just know that it still was subject to the final rule. But from the things I've been hearing.
Which is
it's,
moving around.
If it's, if we can find a specific example of something that's in the interim final rule, the state's position so far has been that we will support that. That you won't be subject to have to pay it back,
Right.
as long as it's a specific example. So I'll go dig in and see if I can.
But the
find
ARPA
something
rule is moving, and I'll talk about this at the end of the next topic. It's moving even as recently as last week with some Senate bills that have come through that they're taking to the House now, and moving in a potentially positive way as far as opening up some other types of projects that may be available for funding. But
Okay.
it is starting to shift around again.
Any other questions?
Thanks.
Thank you much. Yeah. All right, moving right along. Street resurfacing.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and ask Jessica to come back up along with Corey. Talk a little bit about, we are working toward a comprehensive capital improvement plan. Of course, the town has maintained for a very long time. We've got a utilities capital improvement plan that was utilized when we put the system development fees in place. And then we've got a number of individual plans for things like sidewalks, and then an area that Jessica and Corey are going to speak to you about a little bit, which is our street maintenance and repaving program. So we're in the process of trying to collapse all of this into a singular document or spreadsheet for adoption by the council. But the street resurfacing itself is an interesting one. There's a lot of science behind it, but there's a little bit of art to it also, as you will learn shortly. So with that, I'll go ahead and.
Welcome, Corey. Nice to have you with us. Okay, who's the lead on this one?
I'm gonna start it off. Yeah,
Okay.
if you guys aren't familiar with Corey Albers, he's been with the town for over 20 years and started on our street crew and has worked up and probably done everything on every street and knows every one of them. And he's now our Assistant Public Works Director, so he is a wealth of information. So I appreciate his help, and he helped me a lot in putting together this memo, so I just want to thank him for that. But really what we're here to do today, I will go ahead and tell you up front, there's not any big decision that you have to make. We're really just here to give you, as Reagan mentioned, kind of more of an overview, because in the CIP that we'll be forwarding, you'll see that street resurfacing is going to be one of the bigger numbers. And that's, largely because the town has over 82 miles of roadways, and that's a lot to keep up with. And, right now our road asset is valued at over $34 million. So it's important that we're prudent in maintaining that. And, as Corey said, we never really hear from people until the roads fail, until they have potholes and cracks. And so we want to stay on top of that, because as what we're going to share, it's a lot less expensive to maintain if we can stay ahead of that. And let's just face it, road maintenance, it's not sexy. So if we can put as little money out as possible and keep those roadways maintained well, I think we'll all be happier with that. So the town, we do our road resurfacing and our road maintenance work through kind of two different methods. Corey, he has a number of people that are under him, and they are the people that you see out day to day doing the routine maintenance and repairs. They do the potholes, the crack sealing, the utility cuts and patches, street signs, the street sweeping, snow and ice removal. They take care of that stuff year round. And then once a year, we bid out our resurfacing projects and we bring in a contractor to do that work. And so largely the work that we're going to be referring to today is that contracted work that we hire out. We also bring in an engineering consulting team about once every 4 years, and they do a comprehensive condition assessment on every single roadway in the town. And basically what they're doing is they're scoring the streets based on 8 common pavement stresses. And they're telling us how good our streets are at any one point in time. And that's important information because when our streets are in fair or better condition, that's obviously where we want them to be. But we also know that the most effective time to resurface our streets, especially from a cost standpoint, is when they're in that fair condition, starting to decline. Once they cross over into that poor or very poor condition, it gets very, very expensive. And so that data helps Corey and his team to prioritize those streets that are starting to slip into that kind of red zone, if you will. And we can try to catch them while they're still in a condition where we might just be able to do a simple resurfacing project versus we might have to do a full-on reconstruction, which is very, very expensive. And Corey has a lot of familiarity with both types of projects, and he can confirm that if we can just do a simple resurfacing project, it might cost $1, but if we have to go all the way to full reconstruction, that's more like $7. And of course, we're not talking $1 or $7, we're talking 10,000 versus 70,000 or 100,000 versus 700,000. So that matters a lot. And so that's why it's important that we know the condition of our streets. So what we know, and this isn't any surprise, is that the condition of our street system, it declines over time. And, you know, this isn't surprising. We have lots of heavy loads on our streets. We have construction vehicles. We have school buses. Depending on the time when any of our streets were constructed, some of them were constructed to better standards than others, and they're just simply going to last longer if they were built to a better construction standard or with better materials. And so what we can see in our data, we've been doing, how long have we been doing these surveys, Corey? I know you and I looked at ones back to the 90s, but.
Yeah, I think we've been doing these surveys since 96 or 92 or 96, somewhere around there,
Yeah, so we have
early to mid 90s.
30 years worth of data that, you know, specifically for our town streets. And we know through that 30 years worth of data that the condition of our streets is declining over time. And it would be really easy to say, well, the town's just not keeping up. You're not giving enough money at it. Corey and his crews aren't doing what they're supposed to do. And that's just not true. So we don't want to get that message out there because there's a lot of reasons why the condition of our streets has declined over time. One is simply that our network has just grown in lane miles and number of roads. I mean, you can see that, you know, if you've lived here long enough. We also have a lot of streets because of our growth and development that were constructed in the late 90s, around 2000. Those were brand new streets back then. They're now reaching the point where they need to be resurfaced. And we have a lot that came on around that time. And so it's now time for us to take care of those. Just in terms of actual numbers, back in 2000, we had about 75 miles, and today we have 82.77 miles to be exact. So our network's grown 11% just in the past 20 years. Another way that our network has changed over time, which has also made it more expensive to maintain, that we have grown in the number of what we call kind of high volume roads. And these are our arterial, our collector streets. We were talking about those just a few minutes ago with the skateboards. But these are roads like Brucewood Road, Knoll Road, Murray Hill Road, Pinehurst Avenue. Think streets like that. They're the ones that you travel, through Southern Pines on. You travel to Aberdeen, you travel to Pinehurst. And then the other type of streets that we have are what we call our low volume streets. And these are the residential ones that are primarily, in neighborhoods and things like that. They do get, heavy loads. They get the school buses, they get the garbage trucks, things like that. But they are not as heavily traveled as our high volume roads. And so what you'll see there is a difference in how long these high volume versus low volume roads can be expected to last. We've seen that we're having to resurface our high volume roads about every 15 years. That's about the maximum life cycle we've been able to get out of them. And of course, some of those are, 4-lane roads. And so, a lane mile on a low volume road is not the same as a lane mile on a high volume road. You can think Brucewood Road, for example. With our low volume residential roads, because of the great work that Corey's crews do all year long, we're able to get a life expectancy of more like 20 to 25 years on those, which is great. Because if you look through our survey, which is done by engineers who are very familiar with this, they say we should be on a cycle of 15 years. So the fact that we're able to get 20 to 25 years out of those residential streets is great. So just to give you a little bit of data on numbers, back in 2000, only 7% of our overall network was high volume. Today, that's 20%. So that's a big difference. And that's, that just adds to our costs over time. Another factor is, I know you all have heard of the Powell Bill funding that comes up every year when we do budgeting. And that's a state aid program through the DOT. It comes from the motor fuel taxes and the DMVs, and they give us money based on population and other factors. We're getting right around $400,000 every year, but that has been flat. We have seen very little growth in that over the year, despite the fact that not only is our road network growing, but resurfacing costs have increased significantly. It's also a source of revenue that we have no control over. We just get what we get and we say thank you and we put it to use. So there's no way for us to increase that. We use that money partly for that resurfacing contract that I mentioned earlier, and then we also use it towards the in-house work that our public works crews do. I had previously touched a little bit earlier, but we do have maintenance responsibility for just frankly inferior infrastructure. 40, 50 years ago, engineering standards were just different. And because of that, we had some road construction that just wasn't done the same way that we would do it today. Our development standards were different. One thing that we've really seen is that some of the engineering standards didn't adequately compensate for the sandy soils that we have here, and that's important. And so because of that, over time, our roads are failing in that way. And because of that, we've had to do that more in expensive reconstruction, like we talked about, to fix that kind of those previous woes. The good news is that we have gotten better over time. We have better engineering standards today. We have a more professional staff. We've invested in good equipment so we can take care of our streets. So we're dealing with that as best we can. And then the last issue that you all are certainly well aware of is that the economic conditions affect not only the revenues that we receive, but also the cost of the capital projects, how much it costs us to resurface, how much it is per lane mile. Certainly when we're in a time of low revenues, we just can't budget as much. So the last survey that we did was back in 2019, and it was done in the fall, so we're about 2 years out from that survey. And that, based on those ratings that I mentioned, when they scored every one of our streets, our engineering team, they recommended 2 key recommendations for us. And this is where it's going to come into the CIP and the amount of funding that we may have to look at doing. The first recommendation that they made, which we're well underway of, is that we address the immediate pavement distresses. And these were things like cracks and some of the major things that, could cause damage, or if we did not get on those right away, it would get very, very expensive if we ignored it. Back in 2019, they identified about $900,000 worth of immediate distresses that we had to take care of, and we've gotten well underway with those. And then they also recommended that we do an annual program that keeps us on about that 15-year resurfacing cycle. I already mentioned that 15 years is the optimum time that we like to keep our higher volume streets on, but we're able to get 20 to 25 years from our residential streets. This is the recommendation that's particularly important and is going to become more important as we consider funding. Over the past 20 years, we've been able to resurface about an average of 1.6 miles per year. And a lot of that is influenced by those things that I just mentioned, our flat bill Powell revenues, our growing lane networks, increased construction costs, things like that. But 1.69 miles, if we can't do more, is going to cause us, long-term issues and make it much more expensive in the future. At 1.69 miles, we're really only averaging a life cycle of 49 miles over the entire town. So we're not 49 years. Yeah, thank you. 49 years. So that is not a good trend that we want to have. And so we want to work towards lowering that number and resurfacing our streets on a better cycle. So we have put together some data that is in the staff recommendation memo that we included in your packet. And we used some of these factors and these data that we have found to be true to kind of come up with what some recommending funding amounts look like. So the factors that we plugged into our analysis, we used $300,000 as a cost basis for resurfacing, and that's per mile. I will say that that was based on some of our more recent costs, but we also did not include 2019 and 2020 data into that just because of the pandemic and the construction market and things like that. So we are getting ready to bid out our fiscal year 22 projects, and so we'll see how close that 300,000 per mile cost comes in. So we may have to adjust that upward. We also plugged into our analysis the 15-year cycle for the high volume streets that I talked about, and that includes a total of about 8.5 miles across the town. And then we plugged in a 22.5-year cycle for low volume streets, and that's to get that 20 to 25-year resurfacing cycle that we mentioned for our residential streets, and that's for about 74 miles of roadways. And then we did factor in a 3% annual increase to address inflation so that we can try and stay on top of these costs. So if you look on, let's see, it's probably page 6 of your memo. I believe I don't have the packet page here, but there's a chart there with some blue bars, and it's titled, page 26, thank you. It's titled Recommended Annual Allocations for Resurfacing. And this is the chart, the data that's generated from those factors that I just highlighted. So based on those factors, if we were able to accomplish that resurfacing cycle that would keep us on a 15-year cycle for high volume, a 22.5-year cycle for low volume, assuming $300,000 per mile, we would need about $1.2 million in the next fiscal year in order to accomplish that cycle. And of course, you can see we projected 10 years out how that would grow. We would end up by about fiscal year 31-32, that would rise to about 1.5 million. And of course, that's assuming no new growth in our network, which is unlikely to stay stable given the growth that we've had. So on that chart there, we've graphed our Powell bill revenues. They've stayed flat, around $400,000 a year, and that's that orange line there. So you can see the additional amount of funding that we may need in order to accomplish that cycle. So as I mentioned, we're not here today to ask for recommendations or approvals or anything like that. We certainly recognize that this is a big pill to swallow and it's going to take some time to think through. We really just wanted to give you an introduction to this analysis that we've done. And, we really just want to let you know what the professional recommendations are so that we can stay on the top of this. And so that, we don't want you to come back and say, wow, I wish you'd really told us this. So we didn't have to spend that $70,000 when we could have just spent $10,000. So this is what the data shows. And when we go through the process of adopting that CIP, we'll be figuring out what that number is that we feel that we can put in.
So Jessica, what we're, for FY '22, '23, what you're suggesting is 700,000 in addition to the PAL bill to get to the 1.2, roughly.
Correct. And I will say, as we have not, I mentioned we get $400,000 in the PAL bill, but we historically put about $250,000 of that towards the resurfacing contract, and then the additional $150 of that $400 goes towards salaries and some of these internal costs that we have for patching and things like
That'll obviously be part of the
that.
discussion, won't it?
Yeah.
As we
No,
move
that's-
forward.
Well, and the real number's
Million.
900,000
Yeah.
because the difference between the 250 or 275 and the 4 would have to be, it'd be very easy to say, let's use all the PALBO money toward that. That is an absolutely legitimate approach to the expenditure of the PALBO funds. However, you're going to have to come up with the 125 that was paying for
The other
the
expenses
general
would go away.
maintenance that, yeah, exactly. The general maintenance on the roads that weren't just in a resurfacing con. All of the PALBO money is going to this program. It's just that only 250, 275 has been going to an outside contract for paving. All the rest of it is being used internally for patching,
Sealing.
crack sealing, all the things that keep us from getting to that score where it gets 7 times as expensive. So really, this was as much as anything to get the data in front of you. The hard reality is this has gotten really expensive over the last couple of years, and we'd like to think at some point it'll get back into the realm of reasonable, but I don't think that's in the next couple of years, unfortunately. So you will see some greater amount than 250 or 275 next year. I can't, as I sit here, tell you that you're going to see $1.2 million. I mean, you all know what $900,000 represents, and there's really only 2 ways to generate funds for this. You could generate $120,000, $125,000 through adding $10 to the license stuff that you're doing $5 on now, or you could look at a 3 to 5 penny tax rate, and I don't think anybody's looking to do that. So the idea would be to continue to get through without dropping below, because the reality of this is we are still well above even the average across the state of North Carolina. We have an excellent road system, and although we're seeing some deterioration over the last couple of scores, if you go all the way back to 2004, we're actually in a better shape than we were in 2004, despite having added all of those streets, et cetera. But we are starting to see those roadways that were put in the late 90s and such catch up with us. So there's going to be some real expenses coming. And again, we've been pretty consistently doing 250 to 275, and that just doesn't do as many lane miles on a year-over-year basis because of construction costs. We saw a few years where we actually got great bids and we were able to do some additional mileage over what we might have done the year before. The other thing to keep in mind with this is that 300,000 is kind of a blended figure. And what I mean by that is a lane mile is not necessarily a lane mile depending on the road you're talking about. If you've got a curb and gutter type street, we may have to go in and mill either deep mill or kind of surface mill.
Or
That adds
reconstruct.
extensive expense to the project. So just doing a neighborhood street in one neighborhood might cost significantly more than another neighborhood based upon the cross-section that you're dealing with. Again, in any given year, we tend to have a little bit of both, so that blended figure is kind of representative of where we're at. But it's something to keep in mind. The other item, and depending on when we get out to bid, and if it's already out to bid, it may depend upon the pricing, but looking over the 4-year survey talking about those high-volume streets, which in any given year could take up that whole 275 very quickly. The year that we did Pinehurst Avenue, we did Pinehurst Avenue.
Same with Brucewood.
Same with Brucewood. Thank you, Corey. So there is a section on Knoll Road that would run from the Arboretum to the traffic circle headed toward Pinecrest. That is, if it's not getting done this year, it's got to get done next year. And that's a high volume. It carries bus traffic clearly. That road's about 15, 16 years old because I remember when it got opened. May very well be back. Again, I'd like to get a couple more months of sales tax receipts underneath us and know where all that stands, but maybe back for an additional appropriation for the paving this year so that we can knock that stretch out in addition to the neighborhood streets that are already planned for. And that will only also help us going into our planning for next year and what streets can fit into that program. So that's one that you may see in the coming months is an appropriation request so that we can add Knoll Road to that surfacing. Just two other items related to this. One, I mentioned, Councilman Saunier, the ARPA conversations. Senate bill was passed last week. It's going to the House, is my understanding, and this is the federal Senate, not Raleigh, that would allow for, well, 10 million, which isn't us, up to 30%. It's 10 million or 30% of your ARPA money toward streets and transportation-related items. So that may be money that could come available. Not suggesting we would necessarily put any of our money toward this, but it's something we haven't been able to talk about in just general conversation. That may very well change before the final rules are done. And then finally, in addition to having kind of an initial crack at the CIP in December, either in November or possibly in December with that, we will be looking at having council pass what the state refers to as just a reimbursement policy. And what that is for is, should developments go in, we oftentimes through the planning process find ourselves discussing infrastructure that we would like to see as part of an area or a development, but it might be a little bit more infrastructure than the singular development that's in front of you that day necessitates. It might be to serve a larger area or a connection. That's what the reimbursement policy will address, is the ability to potentially reimburse for the oversizing of infrastructure. And we've done that historically in some rare instances relative to some utility lines and or some stormwater type infrastructure. But this will also then address any roadway instances in the future. And again, it doesn't say that you absolutely will reimburse. It doesn't make a guarantee. It simply provides the legislative authority and vehicle by which you could consider that in the future as developments are in front of you. So, Corey, what did we miss? Because you've got a wealth of information on all of this.
I pretty much covered it all. I mean, I don't think I'd add if just the trend show if we continue to do nothing, continue to do what we're currently doing, our rating is going to continually drop every 4 years, and the percentage of roadways that need maintenance is going to continue to grow.
Corey, let me, I got a couple comments and a question. One is that what you guys are doing is fantastic with the resources you have, but let me make a correction because words matter. We're not doing nothing. We're doing within the resources you have. After reading this packet, listening to Jessica and how everybody's talked, you can take this as a doom and gloom picture. And anybody that does, that's not the case. This is
not the
the
intent.
town doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing to continue our level of service in this way, road infrastructure, out for the next 20 years. So we don't get to the position of a failed network. The Powell bill got it, it's flat. We've got to look at something to get a good comprehensive plan, which it's time to address now, to take us to the future. So we're not talking about this at 7 times the cost to do a rebuild later. It's the town doing town business, and it's completely appropriate and right. Our roads are doing fine, not doom and gloom. It's a comprehensive approach to stay ahead. Because if you just take sound bites of this, it sounds like, oh, the town hasn't done anything, the roads have deteriorated. Well, the fact of the matter is, the cost per mile has significantly increased. We didn't increase the expenditures. And some years we did a little bit, some years we didn't, for immediate needs. It's taken a more holistic approach over the next 20 years to ensure that we continue to have a successful network. I think the growth percentages may be out of context a little bit, Jessica. They're good for dramatic effect. 10 miles, 11% sounds like a lot. We had 10 miles. I mean,
Yeah. But at $300,000 a
Yeah.
mile to repave it.
yeah, but I mean, it's, I get it. I get it. But I want to make sure that, because what we say is going to be, hey, we're outpacing our infrastructure, we're doing
And the
this,
beauty
we're not
of what we
maintaining it.
have
And in
added.
fact, we are, and we've got a great plan, and I think you laid this out brilliantly.
Beauty of what we have added, and they addressed it. Again, the engineering standards and the base that's there. Some of the challenges we've seen in recent years, Hunter Trail over between the Longleaf and Tallamore, that was a major reconstruction project that got undertaken. And honestly, that wasn't one that the town ignored forever. It just kind of failed overnight practically. And what we learned was there basically wasn't anything under that asphalt. So at least with these newer streets, that's not something that people sitting around this table will be dealing with in 2 or 3 decades.
Deal with some more of those that come up as the ones we don't know about.
Exactly.
They're going to appear, and we're going to have to deal with them. No, I appreciate it. I think you guys, this is,
Deterioration, I mean, the 4-year, we've discussed, would it be worthwhile to do it do the study on a 2-year cycle or a 5-year cycle? The 4 years seems to work very well. The rate of deterioration can be affected by any number of things. If you get a street that has a lot of undeveloped lots on it and you find that you're suddenly doing a lot of utility cuts because lots are popping up on it, anytime you cut into that surface, it's like a wound.
Yeah.
So anything that gets in that, particularly if it's an older street that doesn't have a good subbase, you're expediting that 15 or 25-year cycle. However, if that type of activity isn't going on, we can get 20 to 25 years out of a lot of these streets. But the high volume ones are a challenge. If whether it's me that's here or someone else down the road, when DOT gets into that 15501 US 1 corridor, we have talked with them numerous times about taking back Pinehurst Avenue and Murray Hill on their maintenance systems, because those streets are carrying a vast majority of the traffic that is being carried there is pass-through traffic as a result of US 1 and 15501 not functioning at a very high level. There are a handful of homes or businesses along those 2 corridors, but for the most part, if you think about why you drive those streets, it's generally not to get to a home or a business unless you live there or you work there on one of those corridors. It's to cut between US 1 and 15501 instead of going down to the intersection of those 2. That should really be part of the DOT network, and particularly with the traffic those 2 streets are going to carry during the 2 or 3 years of construction that's going to take place. But they have not been willing to take it up to this point, but I think that needs to be an ongoing conversation with division representatives and as part of the overall scheme of the new project that they will have in those synchronized streets. I think they should really consider adoption of both Pinehurst and Murray Hill into the state network.
I think that's I think that's a very fair request. If our town roads are having to make up for the shortfall in the state roads, then, hey, let's
It falls on us.
put it back where it belongs, because, they obviously, well, not obvious to everybody, but we don't get any assistance on our local roads.
Right.
And no, Corey, Jessica,
To Reagan's point
this is,
earlier, those roads by themselves take a whole budget year to resurface.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Corey, for saving us a lot of money. You really do. And I appreciate how many years you've worked for us. Wow, you must have started as a child here. But thank you. That was a great report and great information. We do appreciate your efforts, truly do.
There's
Yeah.
a tree he has trimmed every year that he planted. True story.
Yes.
Corey does a great job. Reagan had alluded at the beginning of the presentation that it's as much about science as it is art. And that's one thing that, I've learned. I came to Corey with a couple different proposals on this that was based purely on data, and he really educated me on the art that they do. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but one of the things that they do is for every street that we're getting ready to resurface, we send our utility crew out ahead of them and we do utility cuts. And so that way we don't have a year, 2 year, 3 years down the road, someone coming out and cutting our brand new road. And so just proactively doing things like that is so smart. And that's just part of the art of figuring out which streets do we need to do, how do we need to tackle that. So, really under Corey's leadership, and James deserves praise for that as well, because he oversees the utility department. We are making smart decisions and trying to be as efficient as possible.
Once again, not minimum standards, because that's not what we do.
And the other part of that art is really maximizing the dollars that are appropriated each year. Scientifically, you could take the 4-year rating and again, things happen within those 4 years that streets may juxtapose and change, but you could take the 4-year rating and say, well, obviously you're going to knock off 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, sometimes if Street 4 needs to get knocked off and it's in the same neighborhood as Street 1, there's actually a contract savings due to just having the equipment and
Essentially
stuff moved into a
mobilization.
neighborhood. So it's really a puzzle every year of putting it together and determining the most that can get done given the dollars that are on hand and the contracting situation. So.
Great information.
It's very nice.
It's good to have. It reminds me of that stormwater conversation we had about the drainage and the pipes and grading them and budgeting for it. Was bringing flashbacks to that. No, but
Same sexy conversation
Yeah.
we had back then too.
No,
yes.
Corey loves it.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
to have, and I wish we could say yes to all we need every year.
Sure.
But we can't, so it's good to know and sort of as we formulate budgets. So
Well, it's nice
Thanks
to be
for
proactive instead of reactive. It saves you a lot of money in the long run, and that's our fiscal responsibility. So thank you for all you've done. Great report. We appreciate it very much. Great information. Okay, the next thing, is that you?
That is not me. Mr.
you.
Grieve, at council's request following a recent meeting, will just provide a brief update on all of the current development projects because
52.
we've had full agendas now for a couple of years running, and it's just a good reminder of everything that's going on out there. So
Yeah.
I'll turn it over to BJ.
Yeah, one of our recent meetings, Councilman Sonnier just sort of asked for a. Excuse me. Yeah. At one of our recent meetings, Councilman Sonnier asked for just kind of an update of what's going on right now. The challenge I have is that there is too much to summarize. We would need an afternoon workshop. My original idea had been to sort of take a map and talk through all the projects we're currently working on, and there just wound up being too many. It literally would take a few hours to get through them all with a brief story behind each one. So what I did instead was I decided to summarize, to kind of give you paint a picture of what's going on right now. And so first things first, this is a diagram of what constitutes how development projects work their way through our process in our office. This is something I use as a training tool for new staff to just kind of talk about, okay, here's a new project, you're gonna be working on this. This is currently at site plan review, or this is currently at pre-app, or this is a feasibility inquiry. Just very briefly, the reason I'm going over this is because the terminology in here is relevant to how I'm gonna summarize projects that are currently underway. So I wanted to start with this. Ideas, concepts, development scenarios come to us in the manner that we refer to as feasibility inquiries. Somebody calls, and if somebody calls and just asks, what's the setback at my property, that's not a feasibility inquiry, that's just a zoning inquiry. If somebody calls and wants a confirmation in writing of their zoning, or they want an interpretation of something that is gray in the zoning ordinance, that's not a feasibility inquiry. A feasibility inquiry is calling and asking a question about a project that will head towards being a development project. A development project we define as being something that starts off with a pre-application meeting, may require some type of zoning entitlement process unless it's a by right use, then goes to site plan and architectural review, then goes to construction and finishes up with either a certificate of occupancy or a final plat. So the reason I wanted to go over all this and this process and keep this up here in front of you is because, like I said, I'm going to go through these things in stages. So stage one is feasibility inquiries. We don't track feasibility inquiries in terms of individual projects. We don't write down the proposed square footage because we get a lot of really stupid ideas that come in, like really bad ideas that are going nowhere and there's no point. Everything from strip malls next to two different kinds of strip things, next to churches, whether it's a strip mall or a strip club, or whether it's a 1 million square foot distribution center. That is the hottest thing in the path of growth for Raleigh. I mean, we get a lot of inquiries, and I wanted to give you some interesting numbers on inquiries. In 2018, we received 72 feasibility inquiries for development projects. In 2019, we got up to 86, and that was roughly about 1.5 per week. In 2020, when we went under COVID, that number went off the charts because everybody who had time on their hands was coming up with an idea of something they thought, property they've been thinking about doing something on for many, many years, and decided to put pen to paper and see if they couldn't come up with something. So we actually got up to 3.5 development feasibility inquiries per week. We did 180 in 2020. And that number has continued to grow now, year to date through 2021, and this tracks because I picked up today's feasibility inquiry just before I came down here. We're now at one per day on average. We're at 238 year to date. That's actually now 239 because an 8-lot major subdivision came in just before I came down here. So those numbers are climbing, rapidly. You can tell the normal rate of feasibility inquiries to project conversions is about 4 to 1. That's been consistent throughout my career. Except during speculative booms, it gets up to more like 6 to 1. You get 6 feasibility inquiries for every 1 project that comes out the other end. And that's the case right now. The conversion rate on feasibility inquiries is about at a 6 to 1 rate. Like I said, they're coming in on average about 1 per day. That doesn't include all the other types of phone calls. But after feasibility inquiries, and again, that's a 6 to 1 ratio. So 5 out of 6 do not come through to pre-app. So the next step is a pre-app, and I kind of put on there, they go from just ideas and concepts to workable ideas and workable concepts. Step one for any development really is to come in for a pre-application conference. Our technical review committee gathers up in the Boyd Room every Tuesday morning, and we look at both pre-application requests to discuss projects. That requires somebody to have put some effort into a conceptual design, at least about a 10% design. They also have to fill out a form that tells us something about the project, and we sit down and the group of, including the fire marshal and the town engineer, myself, the town manager or assistant town manager, members of our planning team, are there to go over the project and give feedback. Similarly, we did 18 pre-apps in 2018. In 2019, we did 23. In 2020, we did 20, because a lot of those feasibility inquiries under COVID did not convert to pre-apps. Well, that's beginning to catch up, and year to date, we already double what we did last year for pre-apps. We're averaging about 1 or 2 pre-apps per week right now. Those are actual projects that are far more likely to move forward. Once again, not all pre-apps will convert into projects, but these are ones that are far more likely. So when it comes to I'm saying, geez, for about every 6 pre-apps that come in, 1 will reach, for every 6 feasibility inquiries that come in, about 1 will reach this pre-app stage, where somebody's actually either going to do a heck of a lot of studying themselves and draw something up, or hire a design professional to actually, who understands the rules and regulations and the technical requirements, be it engineering, architecture, et cetera. Currently, in the last about 3 months, for this pre-app stage, and all those pre-apps I just said we've been doing, for residential, we have about 7 projects totaling 500 apartment units, 320 townhome units, and 12 single-family lots. For commercial, we have 15 projects totaling 193 short-term rental units, 174,000 square feet of retail, medical, defense, contracting, and offices. So that's our pre-apps just in the last few months. After your pre-app, there are two scenarios that the project may move forward. It may have to go through some type of zoning entitlement process, or it may be a by right use. If it's a by right use, you take that south track, which moves a little faster. If it requires some type of zoning entitlement, then you take that north track, that top track, I will say, excuse me, north, the up track. The different types of zoning entitlement processes you guys are very familiar with. If somebody requires a special use permit for their project, if somebody requires getting a planned development approval for their project, if somebody needs to get a conditional zoning district or a certificate of appropriateness in the historic district, somebody needs to rezone their project. This is the moment, and these are the projects where you guys will see it, because ultimately these go to the planning board for recommendation or for a preliminary forum, and then it comes on to you guys for a decision, for a hearing, possibly a hearing and a decision. Now, recent projects you guys have seen come through include 3 projects totaling 276 apartment units, or that are either have recently come through or are coming through very soon. 37 townhome units, that's for on the residential side. And on recent entitlement reviews on the commercial side is 2 projects totaling 215,000 square feet of retail. After zoning entitlement is done, or if it's a by right use, you would zoom forward to both site plan and architectural review. Those two can occur concurrently. Usually if you have an architect running as the project manager, the architectural review will come in first. Usually if you have an engineer running the project, you'll have the site plan will come in first, and whoever is subbing on that project will have to fill in the blanks afterwards. In terms of recent and current site plan, now site plans, you guys see architectural reviews if they either don't comply with all 10 standards or if they're greater than 3,500 square feet. But you don't see all of the site plans, obviously, because that's an administrative task. Yeah, and if they're not in the HDC, yeah. Currently for site plans, for residential, we have 6 projects we're working on, totaling 144 additional apartment units and 98 single-family lots. For commercial, we're working on 8 projects totaling 185,000 square feet of retail, offices, and self-storage. So then after that, they apply, once they have their site plan and their architectural compliance permit, they apply for their building permit. After they get their building permit, they schedule a pre-construction meeting with our colleagues over in Public Works, who do an outstanding job of scheduling those meetings and having a moment to sit down and say, okay, let's talk about everything that's ready to go before you guys put a shovel in the ground. Let's make sure that you guys understand the town's requirements. Those pre-construction meetings have become incredibly valuable under James's leadership, I got to say, and we appreciate that because he invites us to those meetings, and a lot of good clarification takes place at that last stage. So after pre-construction meetings, they go into construction, and then we have our colleagues in the inspections department are over there inspecting the buildings as they go up. James and his colleagues are also inspecting the site as things go, and you have 2 elements to all development projects. You have the vertical component and the horizontal component. Both are being inspected as they go along. Currently under construction right now, we have, for residential, we have 8 projects totaling another 288 apartment units, 12 townhome units, and 110 single-family lots. We also have, on the commercial side, we have 6 projects currently under construction, 132,000 square feet of institutional, retail, and medical offices. And then at the end, if it's a subdivision that we're talking about, it gets a final plat where they show everything is done, the roads are installed, the water and sewer pipes, everything's good to go. Or if it's a building project we're talking about, then it gets a certificate of occupancy. So given the number of projects I just breezed over, you can see why it would be very difficult for me. I have my list here of every single one of those 55 projects that are currently in some state of us currently working on them. I want to conclude by saying I did not include in these numbers, for example, Knollwood Tract or Morganton Park North, where there are entitled conceptual development plans. And Morganton Park South, you're familiar with, has 700,000 square feet of commercial and 650 dwelling units entitled, but I've only counted things that are somewhere between pre-app and certificate of occupancy. So those other types of entitlements, you can throw in all the future phases of Carroll Pines, all the future development at Knollwood Tract that is entitled. None of that counts. So the grand total of all this stuff is 55 active projects. We have, under residential, we have 1,208 apartment units that have been at least from pre-app on. And again, all pre-apps don't convert, but pre-apps are a good indication of something that is at least somewhat real. 1,208 apartment units, 369 townhome units, 220 single-family lots for a total of 1,798 dwelling units. We also have, on the commercial side, 31 projects totaling 706,000 square feet of either institutional, retail, office, or self-storage development. So just lump that all under commercial. And that's our total of 55 current projects.
Did you have hair before you came to us?
I think there's a key thing to note also in what BJ just pointed out that might have gotten lost, but obviously the PD is something that gets used quite often, and he used the examples of Knollwood and Morganton Park South. So you may have heard him say he's only counted what is between the pre-app and that final certificate of occupancy or final plat. Those are two projects that are examples. They have CDPs, but for every phase that comes in, the only thing we've seen for Knollwood so far is the McDeeds Creek School and the first 100 homes. The only thing you've seen on Morganton Park South is the Target Center that you just looked at. As other phases come through, they return to the pre-app meeting sort of stage because they're going to come through a PDP that does all of that again. So I didn't want that to get lost in the process. You're going to see projects from those two larger developments again and again over the years until they are finally phased out. But they all involve this continuum of activity.
I appreciate that rundown largely because we don't see a lot of that here. You know, we only get the little square at the north, as you called it, and some other things, but I know y'all do a lot that we don't see. And so, you know, sometimes the folks are like, why is it taking so long to do A, B, C? Everything you just said, it's happening every day, and it takes a lot of efforts.
Yeah, Bill, I appreciate you saying that because in putting this together, that was one thought I had was like, boy, actually a lot of the stuff that's on our list of just things that the technical review committee is working on or feasibility inquiries that are coming in at one a day and you're putting time into researching it and getting back to them. Yeah, none of that stuff goes in front of town council. So it kind of hit me. I said, boy, for the lens of town council, it might be like, well, we get, 2 or 3 projects a month come through. That's because that's what you see at your meetings, which is still busy, but it's all the stuff that leads up to those. And there's a lot of by right projects. For example, you guys saw a self-storage project that got turned down. They found a location to do that project that was zoned general business, and that's now a by right use. So they're moving forward with about 90,000 square feet of indoor storage. And that's just a by right use that has proceeded. It's working its way through site plan right now. So
Jennifer, your timing's really good, isn't it? Yes. Did he tell you all this when you were being interviewed? Yes. Good. And you're still here. This is great. Yeah.
Hey, BJ, I appreciate you framing it this way. This is a very good way to, like Bill said, a really good way to lay out not only what we see, but everything else you guys are doing.
Did you print that and send that to us?
this here?
Yes.
Yeah, the project
Yeah,
flow chart?
yes,
Yeah, no
that
problem.
would- Yeah, I think that would, us visual learners can see the process.
Cool.
What I would suggest is maybe we do this a little bit more routinely, just an overview of,
Yeah.
just as an update, maybe just at the agenda meeting or the work session, just a quick update of, hey, here's where we're at and here's what's going on. And BJ, everything you're doing to protect, I'm gonna use your words, the brand of the town, you and your folks, thank you. Keep it up. Keep doing what you're doing. It's
Thank you.
awesome.
Yeah, we thank you very much. I know that's, every time I see you got a handful of scrolls. That's not their plans.
I can tell you that without any question, I'm surrounded by and have the privilege of working with some of the best professionals I've ever worked with, and some of them put in a lot of time and effort that goes without being seen, and boy, I tell you what, like just good people. So I'm lucky to work with such a great team of professionals.
And you're very good at what you do, and we appreciate it. We truly do. Yeah.
And it's amazing how that particular environment that you just described, everyone kind of working, can be felt right here within the context where we walk. So thank you.
Yeah.
job. Thank you. Phew. That's all I can say. All right. Now we're going to have a closed session as authorized by a general statute for the town manager's annual review. So we appreciate you all being here, and you have to go now. And I'm going to go too.